level. I've designed all the courses and also started certain initiatives like sociology of family, social gerontology. We've recently introduced a new minor called social development policy and planning, and disability studies, and I've also started a unit on disability studies. So that's a little bit about me in terms of my background. I also got a teaching award from the university quite a few years ago, and I've been involved with Acswe from the time it started. I was their first secretary. So you know a little bit about who is talking to you right now. I have chosen to deal with this. It's a whole area that I, of course, been involved in teaching, but more importantly, it's something that I've begun to do research on, and I'm hoping to get documented with time. And you would realize that as social workers, social protection is basically the work that we are involved in. We are working often with the vulnerable populations, and we need to be looking at what sort of arrangements our society puts in place for the vulnerable population. Now, when we are talking social protection, we are actually looking at the provisions that society makes for the vulnerable. We are looking at the economic and social policies for the poor, the disabled, children, the elderly, the sick, are some examples. Now we can go on and talk about many others, but the main focus today is going to be looking at those particular groups. But essentially we are talking about people who have no command over resources through their participation in the workforce. So that either they are underpaid, underemployed, or they are not working. And what we are looking at in terms of social protection are the very policies that would constitute the social safety net. Now, Trinidad and Tobago, I felt it was important to give you some appreciation of our context. We are two islands. Rhythmic Trinidad, tranquil Tobago. And together we make up 1.3 inhabitants. We are an oil and gas economy, which puts us in a relatively, and I want to use the word relatively, favorable environment compared with the, thank you, and the interpreters are in there. A relatively favorable environment compared with the other Caribbean territories. It's a parliamentary democracy, and we regularly have elections. We have had two attempted coups. They did not succeed. We are ranked 67th in the world as a high developing country. Our Human Development Index is 0.7. We are multi-religious, multi-ethnic. We offer universal health care, free primary and secondary education. And to provide all of this, there is a very heavy state input. Now, I talk about us being multi-ethnic, and we are a bit like Suriname. I see one or two people here from Suriname and Guyana, in that we have a large East Indian population, which is just a little more than our African descended population. But what is growing is the number of mixed population. Our mixed population is continually growing. And we have very small numbers of Chinese, etc. In terms of religions, in addition to the variety of Christian religions, we have a significant, about 25% of our population is Hindu. So that I would be celebrating Diwali around November, October, Festival of Lights, it's a national festival. Islam, you know, their public holidays. So that it's not just a simple, you know, sort of monocultural type of society. It's quite a dynamic, diverse type of society. Now, before independence, we became independent in 1962. And I think that independence has given us a certain courage, a certain sort of outgoing kind of personality. It's also helped us in terms of our identity development, you know. I said Trini this. And it's something which is a bit startling for people who are not independent and have not had that experience of, you know, trying to foster your own. So 1962, but before independence, we did have certain welfare provisions. There was a social welfare department which offered public assistance, pensions, and prison services and probation. We had medical social workers, which in those days were called almonas. And then I want to acknowledge, as part of that social safety net, something called the Friendly Society, which you find mainly in Commonwealth countries. And that provided cooperatives for the sick and burial benefits. Now we have an original organization in Trinidad which does not have its comparable in the English-speaking Caribbean. Way back in 1921, we had a very outstanding woman called Audrey Jeffers, who began an organization to meet the needs specifically of poor women and children. And we've discovered, because I've been talking with my colleagues, it's the only such woman to have sort of found herself in society. In the English-speaking Caribbean, we don't know what was happening outside. But in the English-speaking Caribbean, before 1940, there is no such comparable woman. And she began the coterie, which was the main source of providing school feeding in colonial time. And she initiated daycare centers. Then we had a lot of activity by NGOs, mainly the Roman Catholics, Salvation Army, and the Anglican churches. And by the 1950s, we got people like the YMCA, the YWCA, etc. And they are working in the area of child welfare and child protection. The churches, by the 1800s, had started to provide residential care for vulnerable children. Then we had different services for the disabled, such as the blind. You had the Blind Welfare League, the School for the Blind, the Lady Ho Choi, Home for Children, and we had the School for the Deaf. So that social protection was existing before independence. And this is the point that I want to bring out for you. After independence, which took place, as I said, in 1962, I have sort of put different eras for major changes taking place. The first I've identified is the early years of independence and what was taking place then. Then we become a republic, so the Queen is no longer our head of state, as she is, say, for Barbados and Jamaica. And we became a republic in 1976, and then shortly after that, we went through what so many countries in the Third World went through, structural adjustment, which brought about some other changes. And then there was a significant activity in 1990, where there was an attempted coup d'etat, and you can see changes again in social protection after that coup d'etat. And then I talk about what's happening in the 21st century. Now, once we talk early independence, you have to come to terms with our first Prime Minister, Eric Williams. That generation has begun to move on, but a lot of who we are, a lot of why we are, has been attributed to the influence of his thinking and also the party that he started, which was called the People's National Party, which remained in power for 30 years. And I have to talk a little bit about that culture. It was a culture where there are certain statements that are attributed to him which influence how we behave and how we think. One of the statements attributed to him is Massa de Done. Okay, in other words, Massa, who was the plantation owner, and one challenges that statement today because it sort of gives a different culture, you know, the feeling of a resentment of authority. Another statement which certainly influenced me as a child at the time is that the future of Trinidad and Tobago is in the book bags of our school children. So school children going to school at the time, you would hear this. You are the future of the nation. The future of this country depends on you. Okay? So that you're seeing not emphasis on social protection for the vulnerable, but this is an era where you're seeing more social development, emphasis on social development across the entire country for all people, rather than a focus on the vulnerable and those who are in need and the poor. So that in terms of the vulnerable, you see a maintenance of the colonial programs. That what was in existence before, they just continue. But there is no effort to reintroduce or deal specifically with the vulnerable. But you see a wide, almost an emphasis on social development. And you're seeing universal health care being introduced, expanded primary and secondary school education, so that schools are constantly being built. And now a lot of what we call the prestige schools no longer could just restrict certain children to come to them. You know, they had to accept everybody. And then we introduced the university, which was new for many people, and you getting free university education and expanding housing, renewal of particular areas, slum areas were redone, housing and the introduction of new areas which have now become very middle class. And then something, the one thing that was done for the vulnerable is the introduction of special works, which you find in other Caribbean English-speaking islands. And this becomes another issue. The one thing, it's for the unemployed, and you get to work like 10 days. So in some places they call it 10 days, and the name changes throughout the years. It's called CPEP, URP, LID, and a government that called it LID. They said, we put in a lid on this. But this is what early independence was about. Not much emphasis on social protection per se, but a lot of emphasis on social development. Then we come to be in a republic, and in 1976, and there at that time our labor movement is very active. And we are having high unemployment levels. We've been through where the unemployment level for the youth could be as high as 30%, 25%. And you see the introduction of a national insurance scheme for all workers. And that national insurance scheme becomes an important part of our social safety net, whereby you are employed, you automatically pay some of your money towards the scheme. It's a contributory scheme, and you can benefit in terms of sickness benefits, maternity benefits, death benefits, and for a short while if you're unemployed. And then you see, in order to address the unemployment situation, a lot of encouragement of small business and private enterprises. Then we reach the 1980s, where the whole third world was being put on poor relief, according to the Jamaican poet. And here I need to describe the influence of the global agenda, with especially IMF and World Bank conditionalities. In our case, for the penny loans that we got, we were required to reduce our workforce within the civil service. They gave up 10% of their income, etc. A lot of businesses went out, bust, etc. There's a whole discourse around that whole era. Now, along with that global agenda, you're seeing a lot of emphasis on drugs because the Americans are concerned about drugs. You're seeing domestic violence becoming a major issue, and also physical environmental concerns. But I am suggesting that a lot of this, whereas there are valid concerns for the Trinidad and Tobago, they're also influenced by what is taking place internationally. And how we responded to this is to try to retool the workforce with emphasis again on getting people to start their own business, so that people who were falling out of the workplace, you try to encourage them to develop skills to start their own business. And we came across the YTEP, which really gets off the ground for a lot of these young people leaving school to and just entering, just being unemployed. Now, I want to make a little comment aside here, because the way we were dealt with, it's what today they're calling austerity measures. And our neighbor, Jamaica, went through the worst. I mean, Jamaica really had it bad. And, I have lived long enough to realize that life is a circle. Because what we went through in the 80s, I see Europe experiencing now. Of course, the responses of the developed country, I haven't heard IMF talk a word about Europe, right? But you notice they're giving all of these bailouts and all sorts of money to help to keep their brothers afloat. And you didn't see a similar thing, taking place where we were being given austerity measures. But I think this is all a proof that there is a God, and He's a God of justice. Not that I am happy that Europe is experiencing that, but I'm seeing after one time is two's time. Okay? Then we have a coup, the Muslim coup, where there was an attempt to take over the government by part of our Muslim population. And this has a lot of significance when you're looking at social policy, because after that coup, you suddenly see as though people become aware of a social agenda. The government suddenly becomes concerned, especially about young people, and the discourse changes. and you start hearing about an empowerment discourse. Ironically, it's the same time that it is starting to open, okay, they've been talking about it for a number of years, they actually open a social work section at the university to train social workers professionally. But what has struck me with that coup is that the children's homes for abuse and abandoned children changes from just about 6 to over 30 all over the country after that coup. Now, why this is happening is that part of the Muslimin were 14-year-old boys who were there in Parliament. I don't want to spend too much time on this because I know I'm going to run out of time, but I don't have any chairperson. And you all are all here because you're interested. Okay? But part of what happened is that these 14-year-olds and 15-year-olds were actually in Parliament with guns to the head of the Prime Minister and Ministers of Government. And, you know, it shocked up the whole country. Our young people, and immediately you start to see an interest and a deep concern about young people and what's happening with young people. And what's happening with the vulnerable in the society. So that you see a change after that Muslimin coup. Then in the 21st century, and also this whole social agenda begins to change, and you see emphasis on families. Like, it starts before the coup, but they then start to get money for family services division, and you're starting to get support. I was involved in working with young people at the time and doing peace education, and I couldn't get any support before the coup. And immediately after the coup, the ministry is calling me. Oh, we have programs we need done. Oh, okay. But by that time, I decided, let me get some regular money, and I got my job at the university with a regular salary. But again, it was made possible by this new interest in what is going on. And then we come to the 21st century, and here we are seeing a change in the discourse. We are now seeing a focus on empirically based social policy interventions, so that you need to be more scientifically correct as you do your work. You see an emphasis on disability, the elderly, homelessness, and a lot of concern as to whether or not the social safety net is working. Now, what are the specific interventions for the different vulnerable groups? I would start with the poor. About 16.5% of our country is considered to be poor today. And this is under debate, and you can, if you were reading the papers, the economists who come up with these figures, there's an ongoing debate as to whether it's correct or how correct it is and so on, but we are not entering that. This is what you find on the official document, so we'll go with that figure. In terms of programs, you have the Social Welfare Department, and they have different services so that you can get support for funeral expenses, disaster relief. You know, your place is flooded out. It's mainly floods that we tend to get. We don't really have too many hurricanes, and the earthquakes aren't too damaging, but we do have serious flooding problems. House repairs, school supplies, and those are one-off grants. Public assistance, it's legally provided for in terms of the Public Assistance Act, and that was most recently amended in 2007. In terms of fiscal measures related to our tax system, we have no income tax, for persons earning $6,000 and less a month. Now, $6,000 is approximately 1,000 US. Actually, it's a little less, you know, but you're using the figure of 1,000 US a month. Value-added tax has been removed from all our essential food items. So this is a way of, again, helping to ensure a certain standard of living. Financial support, we have public assistance, governed by the Public Assistance Act, for necessitous children and qualifying adults. Usually there's a diagnostics means test. And then we've introduced something called the TT card, which you can buy food. And then we have miscellaneous NGO support for food, housing, job training for the homeless, and a new category of poor that we are now having to deal with are the deportees from the US. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the fact that the US and Canada and England, but we are feeling them more from the US, are sending home nationals from the Caribbean who have not met their residency requirements or who may have been in jail or so. They're just sending them home to us. And it's said that they are supposed to be influencing our crime rate because they're coming home and you're not sure who is the psychopath and who has just overstayed their time and was working illegally. So it's, you know, they're all coming down to us, but they are making up part of the poor. All right. Another group that has gotten special attention are persons with disabilities. We have the Disability Affairs Unit, and we have a policy document talking about what is recommended for persons with disabilities and how they can be best integrated into society. We have a disability grant, and which is about $1,500 Trinidad money, which is maybe about between 200 to 50 US dollars. And we've got varied homes and schools which are run by NGOs with some state support. The elderly, there's a government pension for persons over 65 years old. This is a non-contributory pension, an entitlement. Once your income is below a certain amount. Senior citizen centers, which are run by NGOs, and we have a policy document on the elderly, stating exactly what should be done for the elderly. We've got Meals and Wheels for shut-ins, so that people in different areas who cannot have nobody to cook for them, you can get Meals and Wheels. And then I wanted to mention a particular organization which has done a lot of work to promote the elderly and the situation of the elderly. Oh, thank you. Which has done a lot of work to promote the elderly and the situation of the elderly, so that once you are over 50 actually, you can get discounts. As once you remember, you get discounts at groceries, pharmacies. They arrange different social activities because one of the problems of the elderly is loneliness. And they have ways to get them to interact, etc. But that is an NGO. Children, we are now establishing early childhood centers so that children will no longer be going to school from 5, but will start to go to school from 3. Throughout the country, you can get school lunches. Children, necessitous children, there is a book rental program. They're not paying any money for these books, but they loan the books, and then they return the books at the end of the academic year. public assistance for qualifying children, and we have different residential centers for abused and neglected children, mainly run by NGOs. Now, how effective is all of this? As I said, we start to discuss the effectiveness today of the social safety net. One of the main issues that comes out is the whole issue of adequacy. The disabled, for example, complain that what they get is not enough. They cannot function with it. So there's an issue of adequacy in terms especially of financial payments. Problems of dependence, intergenerational at times. A family's grown up on public assistance, and then as soon as the children reach 18, they turn in to try to get some public assistance too. Now, even though you can only get it if you are supposed to be ill or some way unable to be part of the workforce. If you can be part of the workforce, you're supposed to at least, if you can't get a job, take part in that 10-day program. You work for 10 days, but you're not supposed to be getting public assistance. But we're still seeing evidence where on turning 18, people are trying to get this public assistance. There's an ongoing debate. Is this the best way to provide for the poor? Even though you don't support a recipient without them going through some sort of a means test. So there's a lot of discussion, about the usefulness and the appropriateness of public assistance, and especially the financial supports. Special works for the unemployed, that 10 days program. If a month passes without somebody writing in to complain about it, it's just a sore, really a sore. And it's been accused of destroying the work ethic. It's accused of a lot of corruption, many problems linked to it. So that as we look at that social safety net, the social protection measures within Trinidad, we can see it does prevent destitution. You would not see in Trinidad what you see on television. In some countries, people with kwashiorkor, etc. You don't see that in Trinidad. However, there are very strong sentiments about our social safety net, and that in many cases it's felt to be inappropriate and does not foster an independent people for an independent nation. Thank you. Okay. As I said, I have no chairperson, so my time is your time. Any questions? First of all, questions of clarification, and then we can have discussion. No questions of clarification? Everything perfectly clear?
The structural adjustment program, you had only one, or are there several?
Mainly, well, with structural adjustment, we started to have what you call the new PO. And the main response to that was to help people to be able to find a way to live. Because with the cutting of the civil service and the cutting of their 10% of their income, people were losing their houses, they were committing suicide. There were all sorts of madness was going on, and mass migration. People were migrating like crazy. Now, what I noticed is that there was really an effort to help people to, okay, you can generate your own income. That was the main response I could identify. I did some work on it and looked at how people coped. And what I found was that, and this is not policy, it's just how looking at people's lives and how they cope during structural adjustment. And what I found was there was a certain pattern. One, the self-employment. But that was based on what they were doing before structural adjustment really hit home. And they had to have had the skills beforehand. Two, an ability to like sew your own clothes, sew your curtains, cook your food, grow food in the yard. Yes, and again, all these things you were doing before structural adjustment. Good family relations. More and more my research is teaching me that being able, when you have a good family structure and you're getting along well together, it's as good as money in the bank. Because when you have people are able to pull together, you go through hard times a little easier. And I'll give you an example of some of the things I experienced. For instance, a family that I interviewed that wasn't getting along. The woman would tell me, look, and you see the house like it's ready to fall down. Look now, I have some money in the bank, but I don't want you to know. Right? I don't want you to know about it. But she'd been saving money and putting it in the bank. Letting the house fall down because she didn't trust her. Well, I think it was her partner. I don't think it was a legal husband. Right? She didn't trust him. And then you talk to other men. I can't go with that woman, you know. I just do my own thing. And then I realized that, and then you talk to other families. And you see a nice, strong house and everything. But what happened during structural adjustment? The man would say, well, I didn't want my wife to take that, so I went and one guy, he bought a cow. But he knew about how to look. He had his cow and he, milked it or whatever, and he made extra income. Another guy, he was from the middle class and teaching. He expanded his CXC classes. So he was making, at the time, I did this research in the 90s, he was making $10,000 a month, which was not the salary of a secondary school teacher at the time, for private lessons. This is how he coped. The other thing I learned is that people must have their tools. Like at one plumber I interviewed, he went to work and was cursing the person, and even though it was so many years after structural adjustment, he was still cursing the Prime Minister, Robinson, the worthless Tolibonian, and he was cursing his boss, Robinson is from the sister island of Tobago, and his boss was a migrant from Grenada. So he was vexed about these Grenadians and small islanders coming into Trinidad and taking me work and firing him. So I said, but you're a plumber, it's the hardest thing to get a plumber in Trinidad. So I said, well, don't you get little odd jobs also? Why are you still going back so many years afterwards to get a day job? And he said, well, I don't have any tools, miss. So when he was regularly being employed as a day worker, every day, and they used to get, because he worked on the port, and the port workers made a lot of money. You never bought your tools? What did you do? And I realized that the mindset was influential as to how you cope. So that if you didn't have a sewing machine at home and you didn't know how to sew, you couldn't be making your curtains. If you never know how to plant, the daytime come, you have nothing to eat. But if you had always been planting, you would have a little cassava, and you don't have to have much land. It's like the tropics, you don't have to have much land. You could have your cassava, your okra, some peas, some little plantain, bananas. Bananas grow well by us. And you just go out and you cut something so that you do not starve. Right? But it is I realize the importance of the mindset. The mindset made a big difference as to how you cope. Any other questions? Okay, I'm curious as to why you guys are here and if you have anything to share in terms of, yes?
An announcement. Dr. Lefrock says that she wants all of you to join her in the Katuna room for a meeting.
Okay. All right. Well, anything anybody would like to add or comment on or so?
Could you talk a little bit about your healthcare, your free healthcare system?
Okay, we have a tier system going. They're the private organizations, the private healthcare, but at all the public hospitals and clinics, you have free healthcare, and immunization is a responsibility for all children. We also have health visitors for babies, visiting nurses. And the other system is the private system, where you can, if it's overworked, the system has its challenges, etc. So that you can go to these private hospitals where people claim they get better care. However, when they're really sick, everybody finds themselves in the hospital because that's where all the facilities are. Okay, so that you can just go, stay in line, spend all day, especially if you have time. I remember my son was sick and I took him to the children's hospital. And he had a very high fever 2 nights. And then a friend said, look, now don't make joke with that. Take him to Mount Hope. And I was there all day. I was there all night. And by the time he saw the doctor, in the morning he had gotten better. I now just go straight to the private system. I ain't able with the government system. For myself and for him. It's very expensive, ridiculously expensive. But these are the choices you have to make in life. Okay, any other questions?
Yeah, I'm not a social worker, I'm an environmentalist. You mentioned that...
Okay. All right. Okay, just quickly this last question and then we all have to leave to go to the meeting. Yes.
You mentioned that the environmental issue came from...
Yes, it's a global thing.
Yes, but...
Rio 21, etc. But it's valid and needed.
Yes, but nowadays, do the Trinidadians feel it as something or themselves or still something?
They are active. No, this is my analysis of what is taking place. Like domestic violence, people feel, oh, we Trinidadians, blah, 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 blah. The domestic violence problem is an issue, but I remember when it started being discussed. And the first meeting I went to where it was raised by a group of women who I never saw in the women's movement. Okay? And then you discovered foreign funding influences a lot of this, getting it off the ground. And then I began to look at what is going on, the whole drug awareness thing.
Yeah.
Foreign funding.
but still
internationally determined in the thing. So that the environmental movement, you've got some strong environmentalists there. Huh? These people prepared, they lie down in front of tractors and all sorts of things. So it's not a very large movement. It's not affecting the general population. But those who are pro-environmentalists are very committed. Okay? But I still suggest that, again, it was pushed, you know, internationally, and then you tap onto the international agenda. But while saying that, Trinidad has one of the oldest environmental organizations in the New Hemisphere. Our Natural History, I think it's Natural History Society, was started since the 1800s.
It's British style.
Most likely. Yeah, but it's all local now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for your time, and let us get to that meeting.